All right. This is a great show so far.
Uh-huh.
We have to talk about this year's WrestleMania, just because why not at this point? But before we get there, I want to talk to you about something that I think you watched, I watched. We heard from a ton of the listeners about it. WWE on Peacock released a documentary about WrestleMania 9. That was the WrestleMania in Las Vegas. Now they got a car. Now there's two guys and another guy driving something.
Are they around in the corner into your living room from the dining room?
No, they're working in tandem to get the leaves away from over here now. But anyway, as I was saying, this documentary, I don't even know if it had a name. I'm sure it did.
But Becoming a Spectacle.
Becoming a Spectacle. Or as some people called it, rewriting history. But whatever you may call it, the documentary about WrestleMania 9, of course, you weren't yet in WWE, but you would arrive a few months later. What were your thoughts on this documentary? Let's talk about it.
Yes. Well, and as a matter of fact, I wrote it somewhere in my notes here. Thank God I wasn't in yet. Thank God I started 2 months later. This was April. And so April, May, June, most of June. I started 4 months later. There were some things I got a kick out of. We'll talk about the rewriting history part. But I did get a kick out of seeing people that you never see on any of these documentaries, the production people, the Kerwin Silfies and Nelson Swegler, George Germanakis had just started when I just started. And, I worked with all these guys and ladies, some of them. I didn't see Jennifer Good on there. Would love to have seen, her, but worked with all of them at the TV studio when I was doing the announcing part of my tasks up there and everything. And always liked those guys. Basil DeVito, we didn't really ever have much interaction. I don't know. How long was he around? Was he still around when I was there?
Oh, he was still there, and he started 10 years earlier. Just about. Now, 84, 85?
I don't remember having any conversations ever with him. Maybe he was just on the other side of the building.
He was handing out tickets with Linda.
Well, that's true. And he was trying to figure out ways to be more show busy, apparently. But anyway, George said they had 575,000 hours of footage now in their library, archives, whatever, which is just absolutely batshit at this point. And what do you think? 472 hours will actually ever be seen by anybody by the time they get finished. But the whole special, it seems like the tone they wanted to take was, well, this was the first time that WrestleMania became a spectacle. And, was a precursor to the modern era where it's, bigger and more magnificent. But Jesus Christ almighty, at the time, Brian, I can testify to this, even though you were alive, but I was obviously a little more cognizant of things, 30 fucking whatever years ago. This was a bomb, as Jackie Gleason would say. This show was a big bomb, wasn't it? With the reaction from the fans in Las Vegas at a makeshift arena in a parking lot to Hulk Hogan swooping in and winning the belt was, great because, oh shit, this is shit we didn't know we were going to see. But it didn't really play, especially the hardcore fans, the diehard fan, the smart fans of the era or whatever, hated it. And, Jim Ross was mortified that the first day that he shows up to work for this company, he's wearing a fucking toga kissing a camel. I mean, whatever he says now, nostalgia and time may have tempered, the reaction, but no.
Yeah. They called it the world's largest toga party. Other than WWE employees, there was like 5 people in togas in the audience.
Yeah, no, that part didn't get over. And and I remember the boys at the time were grumbling they could have saved the money on the camels and the elephants and paid us. Um, in I was in Smoky Mountain Wrestling at that point, but I still knew obviously a bunch of guys in Atlanta, and everybody was rolling their eyes at what the fuck, this clown show. They tried to make it more in highlights. You can make this even more pompous and pageantryous than it was, but it actually, there was a lot of this shit that just fell fucking flat, right? But now it's the precursor to, maybe this is like the Ali Inoki fight to mixed martial arts. They went out and had a bunch of camels shitting in the parking lot of a casino. And
that whole narrative, and I apologize for the heavy buzzing behind me, that whole narrative that this was a precursor of future WrestleManias, or this was the first one that was a spectacle, that's nonsense. I don't even understand what the point is in that discussion. It wasn't the first spectacle. You know, WrestleMania 1 had the celebrities. WrestleMania 3 broke the indoor attendance record, allegedly. WrestleMania 4 and 5 were at Trump Plaza. They got a good amount of attention. 6 was at the Sky Dome. Again, tons of celebrities.
yeah.
And then again, 7 at the Coliseum didn't work out for various reasons. And 8 was at the Hoosier Dome. It looked incredible on TV, so I don't understand. I think it's a false narrative that they tried to do to have some reason to present this documentary.
Well, and also the daggum, it was a spectacle even at WrestleMania 2, which, you know, didn't critically get a lot of acclaim, but it was a spectacle. The fact that they had football players involved in the Battle Royal and they were in 3 different locations and blah, blah, blah. But Caesar's Palace leaned into spectacle, as in Mama Cornette used to say, they made a spectacle out of themselves. It was just over the top goofiness because and Vince panicked, as he would later on with WrestleMania 13, and went back to what he knew, because they made the point, and this is why Brett's bone of contention. They had gotten away from the Hulk Hogan era. Hulk had said, well, in the early 90s, Vince didn't believe in the character, so I decided it was time to take a step back. It was old as shit, and he wanted to make movies and sitcoms, baby. So Hulk left after 8, and Brett and Taker and Shawn has stepped in. The Steiners came in. They made the point that the Samoans, they had to kind of mention them because Yoko, the new monster heel. And Taker said we had to make new stars. And then, you know, they've put this work in, and just because then they decide they're going to go to Las Vegas, which had never been a big money wrestling town. Think about it. They just because it was they had promoted the boxing event Vince and the WWF had, and got the relationship,
which was a flop. I don't know if they outright said it.
Yeah,
it was a flop, and it wasn't considered a great fight. They made it seem like it was a great fight, and Caesars couldn't wait to work with WWE again.
No, well, that's the thing, is the fight was a flop, but the Caesars and the WWF had made the connection. And then all of the executives started talking amongst themselves. And I'm sure Ed Cohen, bless him, is no longer here, but he booked all the arenas at that time. I'm sure he was involved. But old Basil there, Basil. And they thought, oh, this will be a great cross promotion. They weren't thinking about whether or not that they could, because they were used to selling out WrestleMania, bing, 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 but they were in a rebuilding period with different talent.
See, that's a lie too, because WrestleMania 8 didn't sell. It didn't come anywhere close to selling out.
Well, I know, but they
either did WrestleMania 2 in LA.
Well, I said that was a flop, but they'd done the Silver Dome in '87, and they had done the Hoosier Dome. Bless them. You know, at least it was in Indiana, in Indianapolis, where people from Chicago and Zabadiah you could drive to. But what they did was,
in '91, they had to move it from the 100,000 seat LA Coliseum because they couldn't sell any tickets.
Well, that's true. And well, that's because of their, and also there you go. Maybe that's when Vince started to lose faith in Hulk Hogan. In old Hulk Hogan. That's when Vince started to lose faith in Hulk Hogan too, because they had to, but that was a fiasco in the war and everything. What I'm saying to you is they should have realized, but it was the business end of each company talking to each other. Caesars, they want attractions in Las Vegas back at that point. And the WWF marketing and live event, office, I'm sure thought that, oh, this will be great. Caesar's Palace, Las Vegas, because you heard the guys' remarks for Las Vegas. But they go to a town that's never drawn major crowds for wrestling, at a point where they're not hot anymore, and they don't even have Hulk Hogan. It used to be hot. And they're in a rebuilding period as far as the new Undertaker had only been there, 2 years, 3 or whatever. As far as the newer 90s guys that were going to be coming in or already there and going to get over. And so their sales were soft in advance, and Vince did the same thing he always does. He doesn't panic, but he goes, oh, shit, and changes his mind and goes back to Hulk Hogan, or at WrestleMania 13, it was big guys on top, Sid and Taker, whatever the fuck. But that's what he did. And then it pissed all the boys off. I thought sometimes people were a little grumpy when I got there, but I thought, well, it's a different environment.
The other thing is, I don't think it really helped business much, and I don't think you could have thought it would have. Again, they had a downswing in popularity over the last 2 years. It wasn't just because Hulk Hogan left. It was because he left because of the steroid scandal. It was because of all the publicity over the sex scandals. There were all these things that were played out in public. On Donahue, on Geraldo, on the news, on Larry King. It was everywhere. So WWE as a brand was probably more toxic at that period, maybe even more so than the Benoit period, because it really had a negative stigma on it. Wrestling, those wrestling people. So they kind of had to, that's what caused the need for Bret Hart to be elevated and Shawn Michaels to be elevated. Undertaker was kind of pushed to the top right away. But Hogan returning in the midst of that. Again, a new era. They just kick off Monday Night Raw in January, which is a whole new kind of show that Vince McMahon didn't do live weekly shows. That was a new thing. And then all of a sudden to bring Hogan back in the middle of that, after Brutus Beefcake did not get over right when they brought him back at Monday Night Raw, the fans rejected him. And then you brought Hogan into that.
Wasn't that the night that somebody screamed, kill yourself?
Oh, they screamed that. And again, my favorite was still, my wife left me, good. And then my parents died, good. And then my face got crushed in a parasail. And this guy yells, let's go sailing. But that's what they gave him a feckless Jimmy Hart. Babyface Jimmy Hart is a shadow, obviously, of what he was in Memphis, let alone as just a heel manager in WWF. It didn't work. It wasn't a big thing. For the Vegas crowd, maybe it was, but how much of that Vegas crowd was people from Vegas and how much of it was people who were in town visiting? How many people actually traveled there? It was a puzzling decision, and it was a bad decision.
It was either maybe some of your gardeners were there in Vegas, but it was either the tourist crowd that probably maybe hadn't seen a live event or many, or it was the fans in Las Vegas that didn't get to see a lot of fucking events at that point. And, they're loving everything. But that was, well, as a matter of fact, then it was King of the Ring that he dropped it back to Yoko with the explosive camera from the Japanese photographer, right? That's the fireball to the face is the only way Hogan would drop it. And then he was gone, thankfully, the month before I got there.
What'd you think about the argument in this that Vince McMahon did it only to help Yokozuna get over? That he would eventually beat Hogan for the title again, and that would help everyone and everything, including Bret?
Well, that's what Hogan would say, because, well, yes, I will anoint someone else with my star-making power. If Yokozuna had given him the bonsai drop after even some heel shenanigans, that would have got Yoko over. But an exploding camera from a fucking Japanese photographer, it was just more hoo-ha, because Hogan said he's going to do it, and that's the least he could do, literally. and then he left again. So I don't know. This was just he hornswoggled. Vince was like, "Oh shit, we got to sell out Caesar's Palace. This has to be a big event. Besides the camels, pal, we got to get Hulk." And Hulk fiddled him.
But there is something too to what you said before. Like the boys said, "Hey, you could pay us the money you're paying for the camels and all this stuff." They make it out like it was this spectacle and people loved it. I don't think any wrestling fans at all cared about Caesar and Cleopatra showing up. In fact, it was groan worthy because like, who are these fucking actors pretending that they're Julius Caesar to invite the wrestlers to come to Caesar's Palace? It was ridiculous, and it was that stuff. And yeah, I mean, Bobby Heenan on the camel's a cool thing, but none of that shit with the whole toga theme and the Roman Empire theme, none of that was necessary.
Bobby can get something out of anything, right? If there's a camel there or whatever the fuck. But for the rest of it, that's one of the things that is Vince's. I'm trying to explain that. He loves that kind of shit. We'll have camels and togas and fucking elephants and the pomposity of the thing. That's the kind of shit that Vince Smoke and Mirrors was trying to, in his mind, would make up for. Maybe we ain't got such a great fucking attraction this year. And it's hard to explain why he likes this kind of shit, but he does. But the point is, no, at the time, the wrestling fans didn't particularly give a shit. And the other companies were rolling their eyes at the fucking fakery and phoniness of this. And the boys in the WWF, even though now they remember it somewhat fondly, I remember a lot of them from that era are going, yeah, they could pay the fucking camels. They can't, it was just ridiculous. But now they all look back on it like everybody was so happy to be in Las Vegas. These are still international goddamn star wrestlers. Why were they so happy to get a few days in Las Vegas? If I went to Las Vegas in that era, I would, for fun, I would go without having to fucking wrestle in the middle of it. Because I figured anywhere you went and still had to wrestle somewhere in the middle of it, it wasn't all that fucking fun. But they're acting like, oh my God, we got to go to, Valhalla for 3 days. And they just all seemed happy in hindsight about how they were in Las Vegas, possibly because this was the company authorized documentary they were being asked to speak on.
Yeah, I think so. Lots of Vince McMahon in the documentary. Certain people didn't mention him. Bruce Pritchard just called it WWE when obviously referring to Vince McMahon, but Basil DeVito would talk about Vince. They couldn't get around that. And watching the footage, you could see why. It was Vince's baby. That's the reason all these things that were unnecessary were there. Vince wanted them. But not one, I didn't see one image of, and obviously he wasn't mentioned, Kevin Dunn.
That's what I was going to bring up, is that he was there. He was definitely there. But I was fascinated by the backstage footage of Vince producing, where he's telling people, what to do and the motions and the whole things. That's classic Vince. You'd see that for hours every TV day. And the stuff with Basil DeVito and, his books where he explained, they had the map, how to scale the prices for the seating for the building and stuff like that. That was fascinating. And all the other stuff behind the scenes with the production people, Kevin Dunn's face not fucking once. And if they could even show a man publicly accused of shitting on a person's head, but they won't show Kevin Dunn, where does that leave their relationship? But anyway, that's the thing, is that, the new talent, they made mention that they debuted, they had Lex Luger, but he was debuted as Vince wanted him to be the narcissist, which had been modified from Narcissus, like he was going to be a Greek gladiator in love with himself. And Bobby Heenan couldn't fucking pronounce Narcissus, so he got Narcissus anyway. But that they did that, poor Lex, for a while until he became Lex Luger. And then they had also debuted our friend Jorge, Giant Gonzalez, and Bruce was still defending this. And even Taker had to say it was ridiculous. But the poor fella, you know, he wasn't ever going to fucking get over, but he was a very tall man.
You don't think they could have done more with him just by changing the outfit alone?
No, because we tried before that. He was the nicest guy in the world, but he not only didn't get it, but physically, see, he had played basketball in Argentina, and then the Atlanta Hawks had signed him because he's 7'7", really, or whatever he was. And they brought him over, and that's when Turner owned WCW. And they quickly figured out that he was 7'7", but he couldn't fucking play in that environment. And so, since they already owned him, let's make him a wrestler. And I walked into CNN Center to one of the booking meetings one day with Jim Ross. And in the lobby, there's this fucking giant. He's sitting in the lobby chairs. He's so tall, his knees are up above his head as he's sitting in this fucking chair with his feet flat on the floor. And he said, "There's our new giant." I was, Jesus Christ. But he just couldn't. Well, you saw some of the highlights that they were able to show. And it was anyway. But nevertheless, so Brett had thought, and everybody thought, that he was heading to WrestleMania, Yoko, the main event, title match, whatever. But then they bring Hogan back, and he gets the tag team double main event, Hogan and Beefcake with DiBiase and Rotunda, because they trusted them not to hurt anybody. Because what is the odds that both of those guys were going to have fucking damaged faces when they get in the ring? But, Taker alluded to, well, we were trying to make new stars, and they were bringing the past back. And Brett said Vince even told him, "Don't worry, you'll have nothing to do with Hulk." And of course, Hulk's statements were, he's so insufferable in that he's saying something nice about someone in words, while the meaning and the context and the inflection is all about how great he was to do whatever he did for them. You know what I mean? The ultimate backhanded compliments and the insufferableness of his smug, well, of course it was all me behind everything. But that was, I liked this thing as they were building up to the show. I will make the point. I like this thing to look at the backstage, setup stuff of the people that I knew, and I hadn't thought of that person in a while. I got a tickle out of it because the guys didn't used to have cameras in the back like that, and they showed all the shots of everybody saying, "This is for what? What's this for?" And I guess, this is where the major rehearsals started for this type of thing, and I can understand in wrestling rehearsing entrances, especially when they're on television, so that you know where you're going and you don't fucking go the wrong way and the camera can shoot you. But I didn't know it would ever come to actually they just go out in the building and rehearse a fucking match. That still kind of galls me, but we have to do it these days. But then they got to the day of the show. Before we start on that, Brian, did I miss anything in the preamble and the build up to this thing?
I mean, they went over the different stars they were trying to make, and, again, everyone has different comments they make that may not necessarily be true, but sometimes it's just what they feel about how they were used or anything. And then, Sam Roberts seems like a nice guy in these things, but he doesn't really know history or...
Yeah.
When you say, like, I will fight anyone if they say that Doink versus Crush wasn't well booked. Listen.
Oh, I know. I made a note of that. I made a note. Hold on. He said
it's okay to be a fan.
Where did the story had been told immaculately. between Doink and Crush. Yeah.
Again, it's okay to be a fan. It's okay to be a fan that does work with WWE, so you're never going to say anything to disappoint them. But, you know, he didn't really know history. And again, they had other people like Natalia and Kofi Kingston that were making comments that just, sometimes they have modern stars for no reason. They're not really adding anything to the discussion, and I thought that was the case here. What do you think of Bruce showing Pat Patterson's book?
Well, no, that was his book. No, what he said,
he said it was Pat Patterson's.
No, hold on. Well, I'll bet you $5, but go back, and he said, Pat Patterson and I had, this is the Bible. Pat Patterson and I had these books, because that's the same kind of book I've got. It just started later. That was what everybody on the creative team had to have. It was the same kind of book as Vince. It was laid out the same way as Vince. You ordered your book and your pencils through Beth Zaza, Vince's secretary. So he insisted everybody use the same fucking pencils because he liked the way that they erased without smudging too bad. He erased a lot. And if Vince would have somebody like Beth or someone in the office fill out his, but it was a ledger book that he made into a date book by drawing 3 lines on one page, 4 lines on the other page for 7 days. And when you opened it, there was your Monday through Sunday, and you would draw lines, or you would date it with a pencil, and you'd write in all the information for all the fucking buildings and all the card, and when's the last date we were there, and when's the next date we're coming back to that town, and what's the seating capacity, and a blah, blah, blah. So everybody had the same fucking book. So that was Bruce's, but Pat would have one identical, and Vince obviously would have one identical to that. It was your different handwriting as to what the difference was.
And again, like we said before, and we'll continue to say, the narrative is questionable. The actual facts being said may not be facts, but I think the highlight of this thing was the backstage footage. Just seeing that and all those people in that time, you wanted more of that. You wanted to see more of Randy Savage interacting with Linda McMahon. Like that I wanted more of. But, you know, they obviously have to...
I don't know if he wanted any more of it, but...
Well, she was all over this thing and you barely saw her. You know, Linda was very involved in all this stuff, and obviously these cameras were all over the place. But for all the footage they shot, we really didn't see that much, all things considered.
But that's, you know, when they got to showtime, as they say, or show day, they'd done the rehearsals all day, but Hogan showed up with Beefcake, I guess, and Jimmy Hart. They showed them walking in 2 hours before showtime. And Hogan's got the glasses on, but this is the famous black eye day. And the first thing that Taker does is bring up the Savage rumor without actually coming out and saying it, but then Steiner told it. And then apparently they showed Hogan what Steiner said on the fucking laptop, and Hogan was like, well, if that's the way he wants to tell it, or what was his comment? If that's the way he wants to tell it, that's fine.
He said he made it sound like that's what Randy told him or something.
Okay.
The way he phrased it at one point was kind of like, well, maybe that's what he heard from Randy. That's what Randy said.
Yeah.
But that's what a lot of people have heard. I mean, you've talked about it in the past here on the show. That's the story you heard when you got there a few months later, right?
Yes, and well, of course, Bruce told the jet ski story is what I heard, and Hogan told the jet ski story, and Brutus backed him up on it. But basically, he walks in with a giant black eye and stitches, and the story was that's when apparently Savage and Elizabeth had been having issues, and because Elizabeth was good friends with Linda Hogan, that Liz had gone to stay at their house, and Hogan didn't tell Savage where she was, or some drama to that effect, and Savage punched him. And Savage was making fucking thinly veiled allusions to it on commentary on the show.
Yeah.
Which they played here.
Yeah.
So,
and by the way, knowing what we know now about Hulk Hogan, let alone Linda Hogan, you could understand why he was concerned at that point that his wife, who, you know, whether right or wrong, had been with him like 24 hours a day, and when not with him, locked away. All of a sudden, she's with them. It wasn't just like, She's with people who are trying to help her. She's with nuts.
Yeah.
She's with a nut woman and a guy who will lie to anyone about anything. You could understand why Savage was upset. The jet ski story, how does that work?
Well,
how much does a jet ski weigh that it hit him in the face and he just had a neatly placed black eye?
Well, that's the fucking other thing is the story he tells is that he fucking hits a fucking wave and he gets thrown up in the air and flips over the jet ski and he tries to tuck, but the jet ski lands on his face and he's got now the injury doesn't look too bad. It's a hell of a punch, but to be whacked with a flying jet ski, it's still only a black eye and a cut on the eyebrow. So, and also with him and Beefcake both, why don't they stay out of the water? They can't stay out of the water. So,
and Beefcake backs up Hogan's story. For the record, Beefcake
well, of course he does.
I don't even know if they get along anymore. That's why, and I don't know when this was filmed. And Jimmy Hart does, but he wasn't there. They just called him up and said, "Jimmy, here's what's going on," and he panicked.
Yes, well, and that sounds about right for Jimmy. Oh God!
What do you think? Baby. What do you think in your gut really happened?
I think Savage punched him in the face because just the fact that they are allowing in a company produced documentary, they're allowing Undertaker and Steiner to in various ways allude to it or tell the story. And they showed the clips of Savage even fucking playing haha on commentary about it. Must have been a hell of a punch.
He seemed like he was having a ball. If you watch any of that footage of Randy Savage that day.
So I'm sorry, but you know, even if he and Savage or Hulk and Savage were on the outs, you know, Savage wouldn't do that in that way with that tone in his voice if a fucking jet ski had fallen on a guy's face.
If a jet ski fell on his face, wouldn't he have more than a black eye?
Well, of course he would. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I don't understand. I mean, I don't know what Beefcake saw. I also don't know if they were partying. Maybe Brian Blair was there. Maybe someone could ask him. If Hogan showed up the day of WrestleMania and you were the promoter and he had a black eye, would you try to use that? They really didn't do anything to like say like, well, we just found out Money Incorporated attacked Hulk Hogan at the hotel before. Like they didn't do anything to build it into a story. Should they have?
Well, see, maybe that might have been a thought, except if Hogan came to WrestleMania 2 hours, he's got a fucking black eye and stitches, right? This is not a goddamn torn ACL, a fucking neck that needs surgery, a goddamn career-ending injury. You can fucking have a match with DiBiase and Rotunda. Obviously, they said, you know, we knew to not stay away from his face. But if he came in 2 hours beforehand with his emotional support group, he was probably giving Vince some shit already about the whole thing. And I'm sure that part of this led into the goddamn finish they did that night, probably. But it's not like that he was ever in danger of not being allowed to or not being able to work. And the story he said where he fooled the fucking commission doctor. Yeah, we shot an angle doctor, fake stitch. A doctor knows what stitches look like. The athletic commission doctor saw a fucking wrestler with some stitches in his eyebrow and a black eye and took his blood pressure and passed him to goddamn wrestle.
And by the way, if that's the story he was telling the commission doctor, again, why wouldn't he say, the heels were wrestling attacked me? Why would he out of nowhere go, the Macho Man hit me, we're going to do something together?
Yeah, we're going to do something together. Yeah, so, yeah. and also, the doctor wasn't fooled. The doctor didn't need to be fooled because the athletic commission, they take your blood pressure and make sure you're breathing. As long as you have a license that has been paid for and your blood pressure is not over the moon and you're obviously ambulatory, every athletic commission doctor I've ever seen would say, pass, friend.
Yeah, with all due respect to the Nevada State Athletic Commission, I'm sure Caesar's Palace said, you're going to pass Hulk Hogan, right?
Yeah.
Caesar's Palace, Caesar and Cleopatra, who wants to upset them? So, and the guy who owns Caesar's Palace literally was saying, I want a Hogan title win. Or when is Hogan going to win the title? He was expecting it months in advance.
Yeah, there were some clues there that, and I think Hogan smelled that. Poor advance. Probably the fucking Caesar's Palace guys on Vince about, what about Hulk? And Hulk can say, oh, hey, Vince, you know, you're going to Vegas. It all came together perfectly. But anyway, they had the tag match, and I get, was that Beefcake's last match in the WWF? I thought he was there after that, but he made that comment. Is he can't remember?
I can't remember if he went on the European tour. It may have been his last match. Remember, right around that time, well, you wouldn't know this. They planned out, they showed the photo of it, a Hasbro figure for Brutus Beefcake, and they cut it from the line. They replaced it with another Tatanka, I believe. So, I mean,
it's sad the barber got cut.
They quickly made a change to the barber, but it wasn't working. Brutus, for all of his deficiencies in the ring that people may point out, he was super over in 88 and 89 and 90. And then he got hurt. And,
yeah,
he never was able to recapture any of that feeling from the fan base ever again. And this whole thing with him and Hogan it felt out of place. And Hogan also, they didn't even point it out here. Hogan wasn't half his size, but he was a lot smaller here than he had ever been on WWF television.
Well, because he had gotten smaller to try to do real movies, right? That's what The Rock did that. Why was it that for years, all the agents would tell the guys that got into the movies almost specifically because they looked like that to not look like that?
Because unless you're The Rock, where are you going to get all these action roles? Even Cena is slimmed down now. I don't know if Cena just wants action roles. I think a lot of these guys want to break away from. The Rock still wants to break away from that. He did try to, when he first went to Hollywood, remember he was in the, what was the sequel to Get Shorty?
Oh,
I forget the name of it now. He was in the sequel to Get Shorty. He played a gay character, because that was a big deal at the time. But he was really slim. If you look at The Rock in like 2002 to 2004, when he was still making wrestling appearances and acting, he wasn't very big. Naturally he's a big guy, but he wasn't very defined.
Yes, for him in terms of the range of his life.
Yeah. So, now he has been able to make the fact that he's the gigantic Dwayne Johnson into his selling point. That wasn't the case then. He was trying to establish himself.
But why can't a great dramatic actor also be 277 pounds and twisted steel and sex appeal?
I don't know. It depends on the role, I guess. Like, Nanny with muscles or whatever roles Hogan had. Mr. Nanny. No, Mr. Nanny and Santa with muscles. Santa with muscles.
Or Santa with Nanny. And boy, that was a stag film that went around on 8mm back in the 50s. But anyway, they had the other matches after the tag match. Real quick, just a couple of soupçons of information. Kurt Hennig went blank in the match with Luger, and Lex had to lead it. And did you catch? Lex said Kurt may have been over-caffeinated.
Well, like when he also said he thought he was ribbing him at first. Funny joke here at WrestleMania. Call the match Lex. That's a funny joke.
What are we doing?
Bret Hart said that happened with Davey Boy at SummerSlam in '92, which is Davey Boy's greatest day as a wrestler, I would assume, here at Wembley Stadium, right here at Wembley Stadium, in front of like the biggest paid audience in WWF history at that time, wins that bout. Bret said he went blank. Is that something you witnessed a lot in wrestling? Just guys not knowing what to do? I guess the way you plan out matches and call spots is very different, and this is kind of that point where things really started changing, but just the inability to do anything you thought you were going to do?
Well, no, because see, there was always something to blank out on, even if it was the finish, right? That's the big thing is suddenly, that was, guys would have dreams. The wrestler's dream where you're in a locker room somewhere and the bell is ringing, or in later years, your music is playing when that became a thing, and you're naked, or you got your trunks on, but you don't have your boots on. Or mine was, I can't find my racket, or you don't know the finish. And every wrestler back then would have dreams. They were going to the ring. They don't know the fucking finish. And for some reason, all this stuff's proceeding. And you're like, what are we doing? Davey, I can believe. Davey, there was, I'm sure, a lot of nervousness and, pressure that day or whatever. And Davey would go blank every now and then. But Owen or Brett or somebody was around. Bobby Eaton went blank one time on Mid-South Television in the middle of the finish, Junkyard Dog and Hacksaw Duggan. And it was a 4-way, and the referee was on the other side. And I think Duggan punched Bobby, and Bobby staggered. He punched him again, and Bobby staggered. He punched him again, and Bobby staggered toward me. He said, Corny, where are we? I said, ass bump. And he turned around and fucking swung at Duggan, and Duggan ducked it and ass bumped him. He couldn't fucking, it was like you go blank. But I'm not sure that, so, with Kurt's case here, it may have had to do with being over-caffeinated in Las Vegas.
Over-caffeinated? Is that what we're calling? Over-caffeinated?
That's what we're calling. That's what Lex called it, and that's what I'm sticking with. Kurt was over-caffeinated in Las Vegas, and he said, "Oh, what are we doing?"
Is that a rib that you've heard people do? I mean, on the other side of it, Lex thought it was a rib at first. Is that something guys have done?
Well, every once in a while, just for a minute, not necessarily. I mean, it's been done. Yes, everything's been done, but it wasn't prevalent. Who was it? A Chick Donovan called a fucking spot. The guy grabbed him in a headlock, and as he was shooting the guy off, he said, "One tackle, drop down, you finish it," and then shot him off. And the guy said, "What the fuck am I?" But anyway, yeah, so all those things can happen. But every once in a while, people go blank through natural or artificial means. And then Undertaker said to him and Giant Gonzalez, the stare down was the highlight. And then Yoko and Brett.
Well, you skipped a few matches, the Steiners and the Head Shrinkers.
Well, yeah, I mean, they showed highlights of them, but it wasn't like they went into, tons of detail. But what the other, hold on, I say Michaels and Tatanka, Backlund and Razor. I'd forgotten about that one. Talk about generations clashing. Bob Backlund would have been a nerd on Leave It to Beaver. And he's in the ring with Razor Ramon. And yes, and we talked about the Immortal Crush and Doink Classic, right?
Was there something else? I don't think they mentioned who it was. Not that it, I guess, really matters. It was Matt Bourne and Steve Kern, right?
I think. Well, that was
the second
Matt
Doink
Bourne,
that night was Steve
and
Kern,
the second Doink was probably Kern, because Apollo didn't start doing it until they fired Bourne, right?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. And Kern was already Skinner. It was already on contract. But anyhow, there was Brett and Yoko. Brett wanted Yoko to have the best match of his career. He said Yoko blew up, which I can believe, especially out in the sun. And they went home early. That's why it took a while for Fuji. Remember when you saw that thing, you're like, what the fuck? How long is he going to be in that deal before Fuji throws the salt? And then Yoko beat him 1, 2, 3. And then Hogan came in and stooged it off. And in what they pointed out at this point made no sense, Fuji challenged Hulk. The champion who just won the title challenged the other guy to have another match, and Yoko was blown up. And duck the salt and leg drop 1, 2, 3. And as Steiner said, a lot of guys thought it was a slap in the face. Brett was vocal about it afterwards, and Sean agreed with him for once. That may be, you've never heard that phrase before. But Hulk had a lot of heat over there with the guys, as well as a lot of the fans, especially, as I said, the smart fan community, which was much smaller at the time, despised it.
And it was kind of a deflating way to end the show if you weren't a fan of Hogan in '93.
Yeah.
And I don't understand how Brett ever trusted Vince McMahon ever again after that. Because he had been telling him, I'm going to give you a 6-year run or whatever he was telling him. And then he pulled the rug out from under him.
In all fairness to all parties, I know Vince has told a lot of things to Brett, and he signed him at one point to a 20-year contract, but I don't know that he ever told anybody in those words they were going to have a 6-year run with the belt, nor if you were a talent in the wrestling business that was a candidate for that belt, if you ever believed anybody, if they said, we're going to give it to you for 6 years, you're kind of fucking goofy. Because if you've got to that point, you need to be smarter to the business than that. But everybody looked back at it fondly, but this was rotten in the ring in large part. It did blah business. And except for WrestleMania 13 and potentially what, 2, it may have been the worst when you examine all the metrics. So, well, maybe one of those that Atlantic City fiascos.
You know, it was a changing of the guard, too. They didn't even bring it up, but obviously it was Jim Ross's debut, and he was very nervous. At one point, he called a Frankenstein or a Steiner line. But Gorilla Monsoon had been on commentary for every WrestleMania. They mentioned him here, and they showed him, doing the introduction. But that was one of the big things for me as a kid. That was the big change. Gorilla Monsoon no longer being on commentary for the big events. It was always Gorilla and Ventura, and then it would be Gorilla and Ventura, and then Gorilla took off a few, and it was Ventura and Schiavone, and then it was Gorilla and Heenan, and, it was a different era now. Gorilla Monsoon was no longer going to be one of the featured commentators. He had been there at WrestleMania 8, him and Heenan, and now he was no longer doing it.
But think about this. The fact that Jim Ross prided himself on being from the real sports announcer school of wrestling, a la Gordon Soley, where and JR had been already done NFL games in Atlanta for the Falcons, and he had been involved with other real sports casting, jobs. So, and he is the voice of the only competition, WCW at that time. And this guy who's known for his emotional sporting calls, Austin Tyson. Well, not then, but you know what I'm saying. Down goes Frazier. He goes to the other company, and his first night in, they're in the parking lot of Caesar's Palace wearing togas. It was just, you can tell how he, I felt bad for him when I saw it. I'm sure as I said, he was mortified, and I'm sure he thought, my God, this isn't going to work. And for a while it didn't for the first few years, but that was it just, but Nick Khan got his first wrestling experience there, apparently.
Yeah, the last
as an usher at the show.
The last few minutes of this documentary turned into the let's kiss Nick Khan's ass part of the documentary.
Yeah, imagine that, the American dream. He was an usher at the show, and now he owns the whole goddamn thing.
With Jim Ross, it makes you wonder how different things may have turned out, or how different his comfort level would have been if when he came in, they put him on Raw instead of just the syndicated show.
Yeah.
Vince McMahon kept doing Raw, and that became the main show. If Jim Ross had come in a year earlier, maybe he would have been on, maybe he still would have had Superstars, and Vince would have taken himself off that. But Vince McMahon was the lead commentator on the main show, not Jim Ross.
Well, and that's the thing, is that it was still 4 more years, almost, but no, a little over 4 more years before Vince would drop the facade and pull himself back as the lead announcer. But at the same point, I'll tell you what, working with Vince was easy because he liked to get things done. He didn't dick around. But JR and I, if we had to do voiceovers on a program, we could literally do it live to tape, and it would take 45 minutes because we weren't voicing over the fucking commercial breaks, right? Whereas with anybody else that I worked with there, whether it was, Michael Cole was just starting out, but the times with Shane or anybody else, it was laborious to say the least. And I think that Vince should have let JR run with that a little bit, but Vince suffered from the Watts syndrome, in that he knew that he could sell his product and the guys that he was envisioning better than anybody else. And so therefore he was going to do it.
Well, there it is, a review of the WrestleMania 9 documentary. What was the name of it again?
Becoming a Spectacle.
Becoming a Spectacle.
Or making a spectacle out of yourself.
Although not historically accurate at times, a fun documentary worth checking out on Peacock. And they're still out there, even though I just sent a terse series of texts to my head gardener.
Yeah, the head gardener